Well, this is going to be a great episode. Christina Garnett, who I met through my connections on Twitter, and we started having a great conversation on leadership and marketing, and I thought she'd be a great person to have on the show. And great story. She started out doing teaching, went to school, English major, started teaching math, and then moved into social media, agency life, and now she has a new career, new job, and she'll talk about that, working a little bit in AI. Fascinating. Her take on leadership, and more importantly, how teaching helped her become a better leader in the business world, is a great thing for all of you in the audience to listen to today. So without further ado, let's dive into today's episode with my interview with Christina Garnett. Hi, and welcome back to another episode of You're in Charge Now What? I'm your host, Glenn Pasch. And as you know, the goal of this channel is to help those of you that find yourself now in charge of a team or a project or even a business build the skills necessary to lead high-performing teams. Each week, we're going to focus on one strategy. Myself, or like today, my guest, will share some tips and things that have helped them build their businesses, help them in their careers, because at the end of the day, we can't do this by ourselves. And usually we're collaborating, so learning how to do that effectively is going to help you generate consistent results. So if you're new to the channel, just click the subscribe button. As always, hit the bell so you're notified. I post videos out twice a week. Please share. I know there's a lot of people who could use this information. And so let's get started. I'm really excited to talk to Christina. So Christina Garnett, connected with her on Twitter, and we've been going back. So actually this is where it's really fun for you. This is the first time we've met each other really face to face, or whatever we're calling. What did you say? Was it like COVID networking now is called the Zoom conference? And what I really liked about Christina was just the way her take on things in terms of how she used Twitter, some of her comments about marketing, and also teams, and what your responsibility as part of that, either you're working in a company or you're working on a project, what your responsibility. And I was really intrigued. So I reached out. She was kind enough to say, sure, let's do this. And so we're here. So Christina, thank you so much, and welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to be here. I'm excited to talk about this. It's a great and important topic.
Yeah, I appreciate that. So before we dive in, take 30 seconds, tell the audience who you are, what you do, and then we'll get going.
Absolutely. So I am an English major turned into a math teacher, turned into a a lover of all things social media and strategy. So I've just started a new position with a AI tech startup as an insight strategist. And I previously left my agency life.
Left the agency life. We'll talk about that in a minute. So, so that's so interesting. So that touches. I want to jump right in there because, earlier on in some of the episodes, as I said, when I first was putting this together, and I reached out to certain people who, they had a good take on that, and a few of the things that resonated with some of the audiences initially was this concept of, I'm starting out. I just got put in charge, or I just was assigned a project, or I'm starting a completely new job. And this idea of, well, one, how do I prepare for that? The difference between being promoted from within or coming in from the outside. But with you taking on this new role, where before, like you said, you left your agency life. I don't know what the gap was, but now all of a sudden you're here. Walk me through your thought process of taking on a new, job here. And then how are you structuring what's important to you over the first 30, 60, 90 days to make yourself feel comfortable in this new position?
Absolutely. So the gap between my agency job and this is a month. That was a conscious decision for me. I was feeling really burned out. I know a lot of people in the marketing sector are extremely burned out right now. And I hit my limit. I really like went straight into that wall, knew that I was stressed. And then as soon as I hit that wall, I knew that I kind of had to save myself.
Right.
So spoke with my family and said, I think I need to step away for my own sanity, for my own mental
Yeah.
health. What can I do? What are my options?
Hmm.
And as soon as I let it go and I did a month notice, because I didn't want to penalize the agency and I didn't want to penalize my clients because I loved my clients dearly.
Right.
I still talk to some of them as like friends, not clients.
Hmm.
Um, but wanted to be there and wanted to make sure that the transition was clean and they were able to do that. Took a month off, was able to connect with someone that I'd worked with in my past agency life too, who was working for this tech startup. Everything they were telling me was fantastic and great. And just the more I thought about it, the more I was like, that sounds exciting to me. I
Right.
know what it's like to walk into an agency and everything's already set up for you and you walk into a room that's already furnished. With a startup, you're putting the bricks. You're putting in the mortar and the
Right.
bricks together and the tiny things that you inherently take for granted if you walk into an established business. So this is my second day. It's literally
You
only
are
been
super
48
brand new.
hours.
Yeah.
I'm super green. But it's been wonderful. What I've been really doing is finding opportunities where I can assist. That's the one thing I really strive to do in all of the work that I do is I don't believe in egos. I believe that the best work is when we come together. The brand comes first, the business comes first. If your North Star is being a successful team,
Hmm.
I find that tends to be like just the biggest catalyst for success because then I'm giving you the best work and you're giving the best work, knowing that it doesn't matter about bad boys. It doesn't matter about whose name is on the byline. It has
Right.
everything to do with success. Like that's it. And so far, that's entirely like the whole team so far, which is small, but we all have that mindset. Like just this collaborative culture just keeps like resonating, and it's so refreshing. And so I find that tends to be the best leaders. They
Right.
leave their ego at the door
Hmm.
because it isn't about who they are. It's about what can we all do together, because that leader is doing all the work if they don't have a team.
Great. So let me ask you about that because there was
Mhm.
so the agency you worked for, how big was it?
Um,
Like how
I
many
mean, it was
employees?
hundreds.
Right. So because I don't want when I'm talking, that's why I write some notes. So I go, oh, that's good.
Yeah,
Because
yeah, it was.
I want to unpack the difference you said, which I think is a really good conversation, which is going into a company that already has, everything set and you're walking into a furnished house and there's
Yeah.
already processes. And now you can bring your personality to that, but there already is some defined boundaries. Excuse me. But having that ability
Hmm.
to go in and say, we're part of the core. Now, maybe this becomes hundreds later on, but that initial core. Talk to me about why that excites you. Not that one is better than the other, but the way you talked about it, you say, I took some things for granted. Walk me through what that means in your brain when you say, I took some things for granted that now I'm able to do.
Well, for instance, when you go into business that's already established, and this agency was a part of a larger agency network, so it
Right.
was like one core nugget of this entire space.
Hmm.
So there was set HR guidelines, there was set training, there was set onboarding processes, there was a set like hierarchy structure, like all of those things were in place. How they dealt with things, the templates that they had for certain things were already
Right.
automated and set up. Like everything's kind of there for you, which is really great until you find silos in your apartment,
Yeah.
or
Yes.
you have curtains that should be burned down. You have like it's great, and there is a convenience factor there until you see things that are not built for things to be better, and that can be silos, that can be middle management or higher being in a position where they're too far removed from the trenches.
Right.
There's just,
Right.
there's so many individual pieces that you don't really, you don't know that you take it for granted until you find something that you absolutely hate. And when you go into a startup or you start your own business, you're really able, whether you realize it or not, you are subconsciously bringing your preferences, your likes, your dislikes to the table, so that when you are, if you are starting a new business and you are hyper focused on culture, you are going to be mentally thinking about the behaviors that you didn't like in a previous job.
Right.
The
Exactly.
how things are set up, how things are handled. You're automatically going to come from a positive place, but you're also going to come from a negative place and saying, like, not only is this our to-do list, but this is our what not to do list. And so
Exactly.
you definitely see that. And so the startup so far has been very focused on culture. And you can tell it's because collectively we want to build the business that we always wish that we had been working for. We want to build the firm that we, if we loved it as much as what we're doing now, we wouldn't have ever left. Like there's always this kind of idea that you're building something new because because you didn't have what you always wanted. It's kind of like in marketing, or in production, you create what you wish was in the market. You do the
Right.
same thing with culture. You do the same thing with like hiring practices. It all manifests the
Yeah.
same way.
The interesting thing is that, I look back at our agency and, it started with very small. And now we have about 35 to 40 people. And our goal over the next few years is to double that. We've been very good for a long time at that level. But I agree initially, but there comes a framework that you still eventually have to build, because what I find is, if you think about it, you're the person who came in, you weren't in that initial course that I have an idea. Now you're coming in. So someone had to put a job out. Now, how do they build that culture and bring you in and say, here's the beginnings of the culture? It may not all be formed out, right? It may not all be finalized on here's how we train, and oh my god, yes, we have to come up with an onboarding process, or hey, we're getting big enough, we need HR, or we need to decide how do we handle this, and you start systematizing your thing. But I agree with you. We've been interviewing for new to add to our team, and just explaining our philosophy on things. It was very refreshing to hear our team members talk about it to this applicant, but also the applicant said, wow, that's different than what we usually have. So it's very inspiring to do that. So let me ask you, so just to go back to something I'd said earlier, is it in coming into a new situation, so someone you're taking on, how much is it, and maybe it depends on situational, but how much is it they're giving it to you and saying, here's your piece, you build it? Or are they saying, here's a bunch of, like a pile of logs that we thought, and then you build, right? Like, what's that push and pull over the 30, 60, 90 days where it's all you, combination of you, or you're just fulfilling what they want to do?
I'm kind of lucky because it's a mixture of both.
Mm-hmm.
So I was definitely hired for a specific position as an insight strategist and working with the services department and working with marketing. And so because of that, they already have some idea as to, like, here's what's currently done, here's what we're currently doing and need to do in the future. Here's where your skill sets fit, like
Right.
here's where they're aligned. But then there's also just this open dialogue of, we're a collaborative team, and any good startup, like, you have to get your hands dirty because, like, it's a group effort. We
Right.
all depend on each other. We all have that common North Star. So it's, here's where we think you'd be a great fit, and we want to be able to put you in conversations, but raise your hand if there's something that you're excited about, or you want to learn more about, or you think that you have something to add. And I feel like that's really refreshing, and it's empowering,
Right.
because especially when you're new, no matter who you are and what position you're hired for, there is this kind of like, will they like me? Am I good enough? Am I on their level? Like, are we going to work well together? So coming from a place of, here's what we know you could be a great fit for, but please let us know if there's anything else you're interested in. That's a really great way to feel welcomed,
Yeah.
and also feel empowered to step up and say, I want to do more, or I want to go in a different direction. That's a really powerful thing.
Well, so there's two things there. One is that's what you talked about, that unsurety or those doubts or those concerns, coming in from the outside, you don't have the advantage of knowing the culture. It's
Mhm.
different than if you were on the team and now I've promoted you and said, hey, Christina, now I want you to do this. So now you already know.
Mhm.
But at the same moment in time, you coming in,
Mhm.
you have a fresh set of eyes. I always say that you have a fresh set of eyes to even ask questions about what they already have in place. And they
Mhm.
could all of a sudden go, oh, yeah, I never thought about that. Or, oh, I stopped looking at that. Thank you. But having that ability to have permission, and I think that's a key thing for team leaders, people running teams, and people, even if you're in charge,
Mhm.
to be willing to reach out to the other people and say, you have permission to raise your hand. You have permission
Mhm.
to question. We as a team will decide. I may have to, as my position, make the final decision, but
Mhm.
I don't have all the answers. And what I like
Mhm.
about what you were saying with the leader that you're dealing with right now is, here's why we brought you in, which is key. Here's what was important to us of choosing you. Here's
Mhm.
where we see you initially, but there's a lot of runway out here. Bring
Yeah.
all your skills to the table, not stop. And I've seen it where people will say, okay, going back to that agency or that prefab house, where it's, this is the only way we do it. Forget everything you did before. This is our way. I don't think that's as liberating for creative people. I don't think you get enough
Mhm.
out of people. I think that defaults right into silos like you were
Mhm.
talking about. So let's take a step now. How did teaching
Mhm.
affect like where you are now, and how did dealing with students, what
Mhm.
ages were you teaching?
I taught 8 through 12.
Right. So here you have high schoolers, some, maybe some people would say some people still haven't grown up and they're still eighth graders or 12th graders in business
Yeah.
world. But how did that skill set over time of
Mhm.
dealing with different personalities, identifying how to teach, how does that impact what you did in agency life, business life, and more importantly, how does that help you moving forward in this new position?
I was in a unique position because 4 of the 5 years I was, well, actually, you could argue all of it,
Right.
but I was always given students who were learning differences, like always. A lot of the other math teachers, because I was new, they get preferential treatment. So they want the honor students, they want the AP kids.
Right.
So I was given, I was given a lot of the kids with learning differences. And so my second teaching job, there was something called the Orton-Gillingham method, which was a specific way of training. It was a private school for 2 years that I taught at that was
Hmm.
specifically designed for students with dyslexia, dyspraxia, autism, social issues, with like identifying cues and things of that
Right,
nature.
right, right.
Small classroom. The largest class I had was 5. Smallest class was 4. And then we would have to do like academic reports as well as social reports. So we're
Hmm.
able to really kind of look at them from different spectrums. And you really had to tailor your audience, what you were teaching, to those specific learners, what worked for them, what didn't work for them. So you're talking like visual, auditory, kinesthetic, but then you're also getting to know them on a personal level where you're having to say, well, yes, this person's auditory, but they prefer it in this kind of distribution channel.
Right, 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 right,
Or
right, right.
this person's kinesthetic, but they don't like this kind of tool, but they prefer that one. And it did 2 things for me. I was an English major, loved English, went to quite a good school. So when I was hired, it was, you must be smart. How do you feel about math? And they were in desperate need of a math teacher. And I was like, well, I was math, like calc was fine. So I wound up being hired and then fell in love with it. But because my North Star was them, like I didn't need to be their favorite teacher. At the end of the day, like I didn't need them to say, I love math, like math's the
Right.
best. Like I just wanted them to feel confident in themselves, and I wanted them to understand what they needed to know so they could be successful. And as long as that was accomplished, we were good. I didn't need to be your favorite class. You probably prefer gym, or you prefer you
Yeah,
preferred
no,
something.
no, that makes sense.
And so at the end of the day, that turned into how I look at things in marketing. If you look at differentiated instruction, that's personas. You're
Hmm.
going to talk to a kinesthetic and auditory and visual learner differently, hopefully, than you are different persona groups. They have different needs. They have different pain points. They interact with content differently. So your approach should be different. And then secondly, empathy. At the end of the day, and I know it's a buzzword now, but it's a buzzword for a reason.
Hmm.
If this year's taught us anything, is that we need empathy more than ever,
Sure.
and we're finding empathy in weird places,
But I think
but we're grabbing it.
no, and what I love about that is I preach that all the time, and I think I spend an episode on that, is this fact that you as a leader of a team, I always call them coaches. You're running a marketing team. You're collaborating, right? So we have in our structure, whoever comes as a client, depending on the services you have 3, 4, 5 people working on that account. We have our SEO and our paid search and our social and content and account managers. So the key is, not everybody, if you're leading the charge on that team, not everybody learns the same way. Not everybody, like you said, not everybody receives the information. And you have to be very perceptive. And I'm usually the mediator, and I have to bring everybody back and sort of coach them through this, where some, employee A will get frustrated with employee B, that employee B feels like they're blowing them off. And I'm like, well, explain to me the conversation. And then once you understand, well, employee B just wants the information, right? There, if you go through the whole Myers-Briggs type of thing,
Yep.
they're just like, give me it, I'm off, I get it, I'll go do it. And employee A wants to tell the story and and the other one's getting frustrated. Once you point that out to them, they go, oh, that's why they're doing it. It's not they're blowing them off. They just don't need to hear your story.
Yep.
And I think that's really key for both, not just marketing, but I agree with you.
Mm-hmm.
It's really, when you're building teams, or even for you coming into a situation, understanding my teammates, how they move
Mm-hmm.
through the world, how they receive information, how do they communicate, right?
Mm-hmm.
Everybody talks about the Myers-Briggs from a personality standpoint. I look at it as a communication tool to
Oh,
understand
absolutely.
that here's how I like to communicate, and that works for this group, but I have to change it for this group. Even if it's uncomfortable for me or not my favorite way, I have to change, because ultimately, as the leader, I need to move the whole team forward, not just the portion that likes to hear me talk, or they get frustrated because I'm too blunt, whatever it
Mm-hmm.
is. I'm really fascinated because Bree Anderson, when we talked to her, she also was teaching, and she
Mm-hmm.
also was mentioning how that benefited her in the
Mm-hmm.
business world by picking up cues quicker
Yep.
to
You have
help
to.
move that team forward. So are you seeing that? Like, is that just natural to you, or is it a conscious, when you're, moving into this new company, is it a conscious thing for you to go into any situation, or even in your agency work, and we're like, okay, we're going to bring X number of people together on this project? Is it just second nature to you now to pick that up, or do you not even think about it?
I'm an INFJ, so I'm an empath. So it comes to me whether I do it, whether I think about it consciously or not, and I mirror tone, like whether I try to or not.
Okay.
So even on Twitter, if someone sends a gift to me, I send a gift back. Emoji. Like I immediately replicate tone. But because of that, I'm also able to, I sense things quite well. So if someone's angry at me, I can tell, like, immediately, like
Right.
the way they walk into a room, the way they look at me, the way they talk in like emails, like even if it's subtle, like I can always pick it up.
You can pick it up.
And with teaching, that's another thing, because there's classroom management is half of it. Like everyone talks about planning and things like that.
Right.
Like classroom management is where it is, because you need to be able, it's kind of like handling trolls on social media, you have to be able to instinctively know, I can respond to this and fix this, or I can respond to this and make things worse. Same thing happens in a classroom. What behaviors do I need to ignore? What behaviors do I need to immediately tackle? Like, what do I need to do to make sure that it's as copacetic for everybody, and also that it's a quality learning environment for everybody? So you're constantly having to do essentially like sentiment checks. And especially in schools, like my first year, so this is a weird situation. This is a weird story. My first year was at a public school in a rural area. I was in a trailer. I had like one of those trailer classrooms in the parking lot.
Right.
I had a deaf student, so I had an interpreter in the classroom. And one of my, well, like all of my students, when they came in one morning, they just had this look of fear, like just immediate fear. And they were doing all the things you wouldn't want to see in a classroom. They were all like, they wanted to make sure the door was completely closed. They were looking out the windows. They were fidgeting. And I started teaching, and it became very clear that something was very, very wrong.
Mm-hmm.
So I asked them, and I was like, you're not going to get in trouble. I just need to know like what's happening. Apparently over the weekend, someone had been making threats online saying that they were going to shoot at the school. And these are kids who didn't feel comfortable telling their parents.
Right.
So they don't feel comfortable telling their parents. So their parents are literally like bringing them in, and it was an algebra class. So it was mainly like 9th and 10th graders. So they're sitting in this room in the parking lot doing everything they could like contain their anxiety and their fear.
Yeah.
And it was just heartbreaking. So I tell my interpreter, I tried to call in the office, couldn't get through. I tell my interpreter, I need you to stay. I need all the windows closed. I need everything locked. I need all the kids to go behind, like hide under their desks, like
Right.
just deal. And then I ran as fast as I've ever run in my entire life to the office. When I get there, and this is my first year teaching, so they give you a mentor. I see my mentor running into the office from the other direction, knowing that we are there for the exact same reason at the exact same time. And it turns out that they had heard about the report. They'd already called the parents. They'd already like figured it out, but they thought the best way to handle it was to just like be quiet.
Right.
So she and I are just standing there, just like terrified for our students, incredibly angry. We explained like why that wasn't the right thing to do. And then we're able to go back to our classrooms. They make an announcement over the loudspeaker explaining like, you may have heard, but
Right.
it's been handled and everything else. But it's just those little things. So especially during COVID, having the empathy to know that their fear is more important than my ego, and it's more important than class that day. So like the rest of that day, read, hang out, take a nap. Like this is a healthcare day.
Right.
Like you've literally burned like fear calories all morning, not knowing what was going to happen. You take that day. Same thing with your team. Your team might have a sick child. They might have lost a parent to COVID. They might have a spouse who lost their job, and they don't know if they're going to be able to pay for their mortgage. There's so many things that people are dealing with that you may not be able to read the cues. They might be hiding it really, really well.
Right.
It's sad. It's sad that we only show sympathy when they have to open those wounds up to us. Like,
Well,
I wish
yeah.
when it wasn't.
It's an interesting thing because a lot of leaders, they're so focused on getting the job done. They're very focused on end result.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of times the first initial reaction to underperforming is the assumption is someone doesn't know what they're doing.
Yeah.
Or they're pushing back for the odd reason, So what I've always trained people to do for the, managers who've worked for me all these years, and even when I go in and consult, I always say, results are caused by actions. And if we're not getting the results we want, they're doing something. There's always very rarely, I'm not really sure if I've ever really seen it, but I always keep that one piece out, that people going to work, they're trying to do a good job.
Mhm. They
Right?
want to. They want
They
to do a
want
good
to.
job.
So if we're not getting the results, it's either someone's doing the right actions, but they're not doing it well enough, or for some reason they're doing the wrong actions, but usually they think they're doing the right actions. So we got to figure that out. But a lot of times the question I always tell them to ask would be is, Christina, what do you remember from training about X? It's
Mhm.
either going to tell me you don't know. All right, fix that. Somewhere in the middle, we fix that. But if you sat there and you turn to me and you say, well, I know exactly what I'm supposed to be doing. Now the conversation is not, well, how many times I got to tell you, here's what you're going to do. And if I approach it that way, in your brain, you're going, I hate him. But if I
Mhm.
said to you, wait a minute, you just told me you know what you're supposed to do. You're choosing not to do it. What's going on? It could be, I think your way's wrong. Okay, let's have
Yeah.
that discussion. Or to your point is, I'm sorry, got into an argument at home. I'm sorry, my kid's sick. I'm sorry, X. Now you as a leader can, going back to the word empathy, we can talk about that. And you win more people over by saying, do you need time off? What can I do to help on that? Versus, we'll get back to work. And I think that more leaders, and that's again going back to why this channel started, was a lot of people are put in positions because they performed well at a job, but that doesn't mean they know how to teach it, coach it, and they're aware of everything you did. It's just, well, do what I did, and why can't you do what I did, and I'm great. And it's really hard for them to be successful. And that's why I think teaching and and coaching, usually teachers make the best leaders, because that's really what you do a lot of times. Would you agree?
Mhm. I would agree. And I definitely, the best leaders I've had either empowered me and said, I don't know what you do, but I respect you and I trust you and I'm going to stand out of your way. I'm going to be
Right.
here if you need me and I'll ask questions along the way, but I will be here if you need me. Or that player coach,
Mhm.
someone where it's one thing to say you're not doing it right. It's another getting to your point where it's like, you're doing it wrong, but here is how you should do it.
Right.
And here's steps and let me guide you. There's that mentorship gap is definitely a thing. And I
Well, why
know
do
that
you
leaders
think?
have
Why
a
do you
lot to
think?
play.
Let me sorry to interrupt. Let me ask you a question then. Why,
Yeah.
if you're going to say, and I agree with you, and I, my opinion, if you're going to say that mentorship doesn't exist or isn't available, or for whatever reason it's not as apparent or available as it should be, why? What's your opinion why that's not happening more?
I think it's a couple things. Um, like for 2020 with COVID, the leaders are just as worried about losing their jobs as the people below them.
Yep.
And so they're very much, when it comes to like priority number one, it's I need my metrics to be nice. I need the
Yes.
results to be there. And then if there's time left, which there isn't, then I will help my team. And that's where I feel like a lot of leadership has been in this space where it's almost like there wasn't room for empathy. There wasn't room because they were so busy trying to CYA essentially.
Well, let me ask you a
Um,
question.
yeah,
Let's talk before COVID, because COVID, I agree with you, blew up a lot of things. Let's
yeah,
talk last year. Let's talk your agency
yes.
life. Let's talk of
Okay.
other jobs that you were in. Was
Mhm.
there that type of training for someone, or was it same thing? You were good at it, go get your metrics. And if not, again, for COVID, yep, agree. What do you think beyond that? Is it just get my metrics?
From my experience, what my experience with the agency was that it was everything was focused on revenue.
Right,
So it was we're going to keep doing things the way that we're doing them because nothing's broken. Like we're getting
right,
the money, we're getting the contracts, everything's fine. And then if a problem happens, then that's the thing is you don't realize how good or bad the support is until something bad happens.
right.
And then you try to vocalize that and then you see like they either have your back or they don't understand what you're doing and that's kind of what I'm seeing too across. I have a lot of friends in agencies too, in agency life too, and it feels like the people who are in the leadership positions, they've been in those positions for a while, so that if they're if they're leading a team of like social media managers, they've never been a social media manager, like ever. They couldn't tell you what that's like, but they are dictating the success of that person, knowing full well they've not even seen the trench, let alone been in it. So and I really believe that that's why social media managers don't get the respect that they deserve. And they're continuing, no matter what job I have, like I have such a love for those people and a love for their work. I see what they need to do every day. I see the vitriol they have to deal with for things that they had nothing to do with, for things they don't have any control over. So if I can amplify those voices, and that's what I purposely try to do this year, is amplify the voices of people who are showing you what it's really like, who, like, for good, bad, and ugly, this is what it's like under the hood. This is what a day in the life looks like. Because I really don't think leaders, I don't think that they don't have empathy. I think that they don't have enough understanding of what that person's actually dealing with to have empathy. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, that's an interesting, because that's always been the odd dynamic at times with people is, can you lead people that you didn't do their job? And I'm like, yes, you can, because if only the people who did the job lead the team, then they don't have any outside influence or expertise or bring in any new ideas. But to your point is, what I try to do, and some of my team will say I'm successful at times and sometimes not, is to your point, is I stay out of their way. I know what they need to do. I know what the client needs to do, but I'm constantly asking them to say, what's the bandwidth? How many clients can you handle? What can we, now, sometimes they'll say, and I'm always one to push a little bit, because sometimes people will always go the route of a little less than what they can. But I never want my people to be at a point where they'll say, well, we told you this and you didn't listen. I know, I always say to people in the agency, I know enough, but that's why I hired you. I hired you because you're more of an expert than I am, and that's why I put you in this position. But my job is to oversee other things. But to your point is, if you're just going to run metrics, you will burn people out. If you don't
100%.
listen to them, you will burn them out. And I think that's the downfall of a lot of managers out there, is that they're not building up their teams through listening. And to your point is, if it is, I mean, I've consulted with companies, and I've gone in and I'm astounded. I'm going, you're making money in spite of yourself. It's a really interesting thing. I'm going, you're making money in spite of yourself. You could be making more, you could be more efficient. And sometimes they go, well, but that would cause disruption. So I like it the way it is. And I'm going, okay, what do you want me to tell you? So as we wind this up, I have two things to talk to you about, because we could sit here and talk all day about this. And this is why it's fun bringing people on here, because almost everyone afterwards always say, this was great because I didn't talk about marketing. I didn't talk about what I normally talk about. Like, nobody asks me these questions, and it's really fun to get people's perspectives, because sometimes, as you were saying, you're in the trenches, but you actually have a lot of leadership skills, or you do a lot of things, but nobody ever asks you the question, say, what exactly is this? So in terms of, I think we'll wind up. So we talked briefly about this. So how important do you think, especially now, when you're in a company and you're in a company for a period of time, how important is it to constantly be aware, or create a project for yourself to be connected with others in your field? I had shared with you, I worked at a job previously to where I am now for about 10 years, and they were not big on going to conferences, and they were not big on, they were like, head down, stay here, work for this, great company. And when I left, when we parted ways, I picked my head up and I go, I don't even know who I am and what I'm good at. And I had nowhere to go. And I've always done that now, where I say, even if whatever the pivot could ever be, when that may happen, I have tons of people that are going to either want to collaborate, want to call me. So for you, I mean, that's the way we met. But if you're advising someone who just comes into a new job, should they shut it down and just focus on their job? Is there a balance? What's your recommendation for that?
I think it really comes down to your goals. I'm an introvert, except for, like they say, like introvert in the streets, extrovert in the tweets. Like that is me. I really enjoy connecting with my marketing tribe because it gives me a different perspective sometimes on things that I've been thinking about, or things I've wondered about, or topics. And that's been a beautiful thing this year with the Twitter community, the marketing community on LinkedIn and Twitter. A few years ago, talking to a social media person or a marketer or CMO that worked for a competitor or someone that was in the same vertical as you was basically like cheating on your job. Like
Right.
it was seen as treason. And now you're removing these, like, basically it's removing the silo in marketing. It's removing the silo in your network, because because of my experience, because of my work, because of the things I've done, I might see a campaign completely differently than you. And it
Right.
doesn't mean that your opinion's wrong and mine's right, but just being able to have a dialogue and say, we both have experience to come to the table. I'd love to learn more about how you're seeing things or what you would do differently. Like, I'm a deconstructionist at heart. I love, like, I instinctively break things down into like,
Right.
what's making this work versus that. But someone with a different perspective and a different lens could take the exact same thing and see something completely different than me. And I find that that's great, because no one's better served by being in an echo chamber. No one's better served by being myopic. Like, all it does is it encourages you to hold tight to bad opinions and bad critiques. We all need to be learning. I'm very much a fan of intellectual curiosity, and the marketing community and just the network as a whole. There is so much we can learn from each other if you just open yourself up to that. And
Yeah,
so
it is. I agree with you. I've done a little bit more this year. I still find it a little daunting because I'm on one hand admiring people. You know, I watch what you do, I watch what other people do, and I'm like, my God, they're on this all the time. But it's good content. It's not wasteful. But I'm going, I don't have enough time to even do what I'm regular doing, trying to get out there. But I think I made a commitment about a year ago especially for Twitter, to be more involved. I like Twitter, I like LinkedIn, just because there are like-minded people and you can communicate with people. And I agree with you. I think that veil of, well, if I talk to you and you're at a competitive agency, see, for us, my brother and I, we always looked at it and said, our agency, I don't want to say we don't have competitors, you know who's in your field, but we used to always say there's enough for everybody. Like, why are we fighting over this? We would host conferences and we would have people who run other agencies come there, and people would say, why would you have someone else there who does the exact same thing as you? I said, well, I like them. They have a good perspective. They're good speakers, and there's enough for everybody. And I think that's the one thing I've seen over this year, and I've connected with a few more people. And what's nice is the other day when you shared out that list of like 10 different people, and then someone else did, I was exhausted by the end following all these people. But since then, I've been opened up to a bunch of other people who have a great perspective. And I said, oh, that's great. I learn things from them because people are sharing good information. I think sometimes people look at social media and think it's all just garbage, and there is garbage out there. But if you connect with the right group, there is a lot of caring and sharing and opinion. Or I could type something the other day going, I'm looking at a different platform. What do you think? And boom, 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 boom. I'm getting messages back to me on things that I asked you. And I was going, I heard of that, never heard of that one. Let's go take a look. So I think, as we wind down here, I think one lesson for all individuals and especially leaders is when you get into a company and you're focused on your team, please be focused on your team. But
Yes.
understand that connecting with your network and opening up and continuing your education and your ability to learn or have a contrary opinion or have someone contrast your opinion, you're going to bring more value to your team than putting the blinders on and saying la 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 and I don't want to listen to anything. I think what you're doing is you're not building a team. To your point is I think you're building a silo around your team, and I don't think that's going to end well.
Absolutely, completely agree. I definitely am a fan of community over competition and being open, like just because you're a leader, it doesn't mean that your team can't teach you something. In fact, if your team teaches you something, I would say that that's a mark of you hiring good people.
Sure. I think that all the time. I'm always, I call people in and I say, all right, I know this much and I'm missing this, or remind me about this. And I think that helps the team feel like they're supporting versus where they have an input into things versus I know everything. And I always go, I know what I'm good at. And it's not what you're good at, because that's why you're in your chair and I'm in my chair. And they'll go, yeah, you go take care of that. We'll take care of this. Together, we move everything forward. So great. So let me just wrap up. I always ask everybody this question most of the time if we didn't touch on it already. What was the best piece of advice that you got from someone? Either they told you, or like you said, when you saw what worked or what didn't work, that's helped you lead your teams or your projects better? What was the one thing that came to you and just was like, ooh, I've always gone back to that. That's my go-to reminder. What would you say that is?
A candle loses nothing by lighting another candle. That's it.
I love that one. I think that's great.
Great.
I think that's great, because I think that the minute that you are open to that, that means you're open to your team, you're open to community, you're open to others without fear of lessening yourself. Like that's awesome. Well, look, this was great. I always just lose track of time. That's why I have my handy dandy timer here, because I could just talk with you, and I hope that we will continue to communicate online, and I hope that we will circle back in the future. I might grab a couple people and do one of these with 2 or 3 people and have a discussion. But I really want to thank you for taking the time, bringing value to the people who are going to watch this. So before we jump off here and we wind up and we actually close out the show, take a couple seconds to tell people where they can find you online, and everyone out there, you should follow Christina, but go ahead, tell them where they can find you.
Absolutely. So if you like reading blogs, I'm on Medium. You can just search for Christina Garnett. On Twitter, I'm that Christina G. I'm also that on Instagram, but my Instagram is flowers and trees and clouds. It's not a marketer's Instagram. It's basically like a Taylor Swift aesthetic folklore album. And then you can find me on LinkedIn as well at Christina Garnett.
Well, great. So again, thank you so much. Audience, again, I appreciate your attention. There's so much here. I know, hopefully, if you've made it this far, you're going, I have to go back and listen to this again. Over the next couple weeks, we'll be releasing the audio of all of these episodes just for podcasts. So this way, when you're working out or you're driving, you can listen to all the great content as well. Again, as always, just subscribe if you haven't already. Please share. And also, I'd love to hear what you think. Throw in your comments. Love to hear. And if there's a topic or someone you want me to interview, please let me know. So again, thank you, Christina. See you online soon. And as I say at the end of every episode, you're in charge. But now Christina gave you a few more tools to help you become more successful. Thanks again, and I'll see you next episode.